The morning sun cast a warm glow over the quiet town as Tom Bennett made his way to the local diner, a ritual that marked his Saturdays. The diner, with its retro chrome finish and checkered floors, buzzed softly with the gentle murmur of townsfolk and the clinking of coffee cups. Tom, favoring his right side slightly, navigated to his usual booth by the window, where he could watch the world awaken at its own leisurely pace. As he settled in with a sigh, placing his cane against the table, Tom's presence was hardly noticeable to the casual observer. A quiet man, seemingly at peace. However, the tranquility of the morning was soon to be shattered. The rumble of motorcycles broke the calm as the Chrome Skulls, a local biker gang notorious for their disdain for authority and disruptive antics, pulled up. Their leather jackets creaked and their boots thudded against the linoleum as they made their grand entrance into the diner. The leader of the gang, Vic, a burly man with a thick beard and piercing eyes, immediately noticed Tom sitting alone, an easy target for a show of power. With a sneer, Vic led his gang towards Tom's booth, their laughter echoing off the walls, turning heads and lowering voices. "Hey, look at this, boys," Vic called out, pointing at Tom's prosthetic leg visible beneath the table. "We got ourselves a war hero here. How's it going, Pegleg?" The gang erupted in cruel laughter, not bothering to lower their voices. They crowded around Tom's booth, leaning in too close, their breath smelling of cigarettes and last night's booze. Tom remained silent, his jaw tightening as he focused on his breakfast, trying to ignore the taunts. Not satisfied with the lack of response, Vic knocked Tom's cane to the floor, a deliberate provocation. "What's wrong, hero? Can't stand up for yourself?" he mocked, the gang laughing even louder. The diner's atmosphere thickened with tension. Other patrons glanced nervously at one another, discomfort visible on their faces, but none dared to intervene. Tom looked at his fallen cane, then up at Vic, his eyes hardening with a resolve forged in battles far more deadly than any biker gang skirmish. "I don't want trouble," Tom stated clearly, his voice steady despite the rising anger. "Just trying to enjoy my breakfast?" Vic smirked, stepping back with exaggerated nonchalance. "Oh, we're just having some fun, aren't we, boys?" He turned back to his gang, but his eyes still held a gleam of malice as he watched Tom struggle slightly to retrieve his cane. Tom reached down slowly, his movements deliberate. As he gripped the cane, he paused, feeling the eyes of the entire diner on him. This moment wasn't just about a fallen object. It was a test of his dignity. With a swift, smooth motion more agile than anyone expected, Tom stood, balancing himself with the cane in one hand. He faced Vic, his posture straight, his presence suddenly looming larger than it had seconds before. "You might think it's fun to mock someone's injuries," Tom began, his voice rising with a quiet power that filled the diner. "But this," he tapped his prosthetic leg, "was earned in places you can't imagine, doing things you couldn't handle. So, I suggest you sit down and show some respect, not just to me, but to everyone in this place you're disturbing." Vic, taken aback by the unexpected defiance and the intensity in Tom's eyes, found himself at a loss for words. The laughter of his gang had died down, replaced by an awkward silence. The other diners watched, some with open admiration for Tom's courage. After a tense moment, Vic scoffed, trying to salvage some of his pride. "Whatever, man," he muttered, gesturing for his gang to follow him back to their table. They went, but the swagger was gone, their heads lowered, their laughter forced. Tom sat back down, his breathing slow and measured as he regained his composure. The waitress hurried over with a fresh cup of coffee, her smile warm. "On the house," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with respect. As the morning wore on, the atmosphere in the diner slowly returned to normal, but the image of Tom standing up to the bikers remained etched in the minds of all who witnessed it. Tom finished his breakfast in peace, a quiet victor in a battle he never wished to fight, proving that true strength lies not just in the ability to stand up, but in the courage to do so with dignity. After the confrontation at the diner, word of Tom's stand against the bikers spread through the small town like wildfire. Locals who had often seen him, but never interacted, began to view him with a newfound respect. However, with increased notoriety came renewed challenges. As Tom walked through the main street a few days later, he noticed the change in people's perceptions. Shopkeepers nodded to him, and residents smiled, some even stepping forward to express their appreciation for his courage. "You really showed those bikers, Tom," said Mr. Jensen, the owner of the local hardware store. "It's about time someone did." While the positive recognition was heartening, it also stirred a sense of unease in Tom. He hadn't stood up to the bikers to become a town hero. He'd done it to maintain his dignity. The growing attention made him uncomfortable, a reminder of how much he preferred to stay under the radar. The real test came later that week. As Tom sat at a park bench enjoying the quiet of an early evening, the familiar rumble of motorcycles broke the peace. His heart tightened as he saw the Chrome Skulls gang rolling into the park, their faces hard, their eyes on him. The gang parked their bikes and approached Tom, their leader, Vic, at the forefront. The air was thick with tension, but this time, Tom was prepared for their approach, his posture relaxed yet alert. "Thought about what happened at the diner, Tom," Vic began, his tone surprisingly conciliatory. "We came off too strong. We're not looking for a war here." Tom assessed Vic's sincerity, searching for any sign of deceit. "Appreciate that," he replied cautiously, not fully convinced of Vic's intentions. "Peace is always preferable to conflict." Vic nodded, and a moment of silence passed between them, an unspoken negotiation hanging in the air. Then, without warning, Vic's demeanor changed, his next words slicing through the quiet. "But don't think this means we respect you," he sneered. "You're still just a crippled has-been to us." The provocation was clear, and a lesser man might have responded with anger, but Tom, ever the strategist, kept his cool. He stood, facing Vic with a steady gaze. "You can think what you want," he stated firmly, "but actions speak louder than words. I stood up to you once, and I can do it again, but I'd rather not have to." The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. They had expected Tom to react with aggression, perhaps hoping to justify their own. Instead, they found a man unshaken by their insults, his strength not just physical, but moral. Seeing that they weren't going to goad him into a fight, Vic scoffed and gave a dismissive wave. "Come on, let's get out of here," he muttered to his gang, and they turned to leave, their departure much less triumphant than their arrival. As they rode away, Tom sat back down, his body feeling suddenly weary. He knew this wasn't the end of it. Men like Vic didn't change overnight. But he also knew he had passed a significant test, not just of his courage, but of his ability to control the narrative on his own terms. He looked around the quiet park, the tranquility now returning. Tom realized that while he couldn't stop people from challenging him, he could choose how to respond. And perhaps, in doing so, he could teach them something about respect and strength that they clearly hadn't learned elsewhere. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the path, Tom felt a sense of resolve solidifying within him. This town was his home, and he would live his life on his terms, with or without the approval of others. He stood up, his prosthetic leg catching the last light of the day, a symbol not of weakness, but of undeniable resilience. As autumn ushered in cooler winds and a cascade of falling leaves, Tom found himself increasingly reflective about his role within the small community. The town was buzzing not just with the change of season, but with ongoing discussions about Tom's quiet defiance against local bullies. His story, far from fading into the background, had ignited a broader dialogue about respect, courage, and the unseen battles that veterans continue to fight. One crisp morning, Tom decided to visit the diner once again, a place that had become a symbolic battleground for his dignity. As he approached, he noticed the diner seemed busier than usual. Entering, he was greeted by an unexpected round of applause. The regulars, along with a few newcomers, had organized a small appreciation event in his honor. Banners reading "Our local hero" and "Thank you for your service and courage" adorned the walls. Flustered but touched, Tom nodded in thanks as he made his way to his usual booth. Sarah, the diner's owner, came over with a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, on the house, of course. "Tom, we've never properly thanked you for standing up the way you did. Not just to those bikers, but for showing us all what real strength looks like," she said sincerely. Tom, typically a man of few words, felt compelled to respond. "I appreciate this, really, but I didn't do anything special. Just stood up for myself, that's all." "That might be true, Tom, but it gave us all a bit of courage, too," interjected Mr. Jensen, the local hardware store owner, who had come over to shake his hand. "Makes us think we can stand up to bullies, too." As the morning progressed, Tom engaged in conversations, sharing stories from his service days when appropriate, but more often listening to the stories of others, stories of small acts of courage and moments of community solidarity. It was becoming clear that his actions had catalyzed a stronger sense of community spirit. However, the true test came later that afternoon. The Chrome Skulls, led by Vic, roared into the diner parking lot once again. The atmosphere tensed immediately, patrons pausing mid-conversation, watching warily as the bikers dismounted and entered. Vic, his demeanor noticeably less confrontational than before, spotted Tom and walked over. His gang hung back, their expressions unreadable. "Tom," Vic began, his voice carrying a hint of reluctance. "We've had our differences, but I've come to say you've got some guts. We were out of line before, and we don't want bad blood with you or anyone else here." Surprised by this turn of events, but not entirely convinced of its sincerity, Tom studied Vic carefully before responding. "Appreciate your words, Vic. Let's just respect each other's space and keep the peace." "Agreed," Vic nodded before retreating back to his gang, who then quietly took a table at the other end of the diner. The rest of the day unfolded peacefully, with the Chrome Skulls keeping to themselves. Tom's interaction with Vic was observed by many, further solidifying his status not just as a tough veteran, but as a peacemaker. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple, Tom left the diner, his steps light, his heart a bit fuller. He'd not only stood up to adversity, but had also helped foster a sense of unity in his community. He realized that his battles, both past and present, were not just his own, but part of a larger narrative of resilience and mutual respect. Walking home, Tom felt a renewed connection to the town and its people. He knew challenges lay ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had become more than a veteran. He had become a vital part of a community that valued strength in all its forms.